Welcome to the Jagged Moon podcast. My name is Dr. Paul Hamilton, and I'm here with Professor Hunter Reeve, and we are at the Monterey Beach Hotel tonight, and you can probably hear the waves crashing in the background. And this is going to be the setting for our discussion of the broken and the beautiful in literature and life, and we're discussing the fragility and vulnerability of the human condition, the brokenness, if you will, of the human condition, and how it is that we respond to this. What is the response in literature, what are the profound responses in literature to this human condition? And I think that the literary reference that really exemplifies this discussion is Hamlet's "To Be or Not to Be" speech, in which he discusses the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. And he asked the question, should we continue existing or should we not exist? Or is existence worthwhile? Should we commit suicide to escape from the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, this condition of infinite vulnerability? Why not just end things so that we are not susceptible to this intolerable situation where anything can happen to us? And that's the discussion. In Hamlet's speech, of course, he then realizes that the problem is not so easy as all of that, but we will talk about the complications of this problem and how different literary traditions and cultural traditions have responded to this. And so what are your opening thoughts on this topic, Professor Reeve?
I think that vulnerability is widespread, as you intimated earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a poem to read that is similar in ideas to what you were talking about in Hamlet.
Yeah.
But it's, of course, a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And the line that many of my devotees, if you will, of poetry, line they liked so much was the following, and then I'll read the poem.
Sure.
The knife of love sharpened itself on my heart. I traveled in a narrow red valley of lightly shining trees. Relief found me, and I knew we would meet again. Though we were so far apart, it was chancy. Angels sang in the body of a cat who longed for consuming affection. A bright blue light appeared by my side, proving my spirit. I hope our meeting is soon. They say I'm old. The knife of love sharpened itself on my heart. Well, I realize there's two ways to talk about this poem. One is a dearly beloved friend was very, very far away from me, and I wrote this poem to honor our relationship. That's one interpretation. The other is the following, that my lover died 10 years ago, a painful death from cancer, and she was young. And I try to reach her on a spiritual level, so this is what this is about. And it's real if I can reach her on a spiritual level. And the blue light that I saw in a vision is real because I see visions often. So I think that Paul while Dr. Hamilton was talking about why don't we just end it all? And I think, why don't we just end it? Because in my case, and maybe in many others, there is a spiritual in my life, and it's very vital. So did you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, can you say that line again? The knife. Wait.
The knife of love sharpened itself on my heart.
Yeah, the knife of love sharpened itself on my heart. Yeah, I mean, I think that, we were talking about the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, and Hamlet says earlier, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as if we're being pierced by arrows, and that there's really nothing that can in the end protect us from these arrows. And love itself may be something that a knife of love that sharpens itself on your heart. And I think that the thing that strikes me about this is that no matter what you go through, I think that at some point it occurs to you as you pass through life that you think initially that once you pass through a certain set of experiences that, I don't know, or maybe foolishly, that you'll achieve some kind of perch, or that will be a kind of stasis, or some kind of position that will be well defended, and that never happens. So there's always that, whether it's the knife of love or just the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, there's always something that can pierce you. There's no protection. And I think that there are, I think that you then realize that there's no solution for this, that there's no move that you can make that is going to be a bulwark against anything that could possibly happen to you. And so I think that this sort of intolerable feeling is part of being human. I was the brokenness and the beautiful aspect of being human, that we can be broken. Muriel Rukeyser also has a beautiful line from a poem called Water Lily Fire, about Monet's water lily paintings in the 1950s that were burned, not all of them, but one set of them that was burned as they were being housed at a museum in New York. And she says, whatever can happen to a wall will happen to this wall. Whatever can happen to a wall, a fortress, a protection, will happen to this wall. In other words, I will watch as the thing that is protecting me burns down. And that is the, I think that that's the sort of the unbearable. And so then why wouldn't you want it's protection, and but there is no protection, and so there is no or no absolute protection. You can have little shelters for a while.
Right, and I think that getting back to the spirit, when I was longing for my friend's company and also the spiritual company of my dead lover, I was able to concoct somehow a vision when I was in this quandary of a bright blue light
Yeah.
that had, I forgot to say, some hieroglyphics type writing on it, like it was very spiritual and special. And so I knew that was positive rather than negative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that speaks to this issue, which is that vulnerability has a direct connection to visionary states, transformation, or transfiguration, and that you can't have one without the other. But I also, I mean, I think that philosophically what we're talking about is contingency, that we are never in a state where we are somehow self-existent, like they used to say God was, or maybe some theologians still do feel that way, or perfectly immovable and impenetrable, that we are always dependent on all of the as soon as you have a great moment that feels perfect, that moment disappears, and then you are in another moment where now you are vulnerable again. So you can have the greatest success, you can be you can run the house, you can win, you can be a robber baron and amass a fortune, and or you can have the biggest possible success, possible, win a Nobel Prize, and you think, oh, I was a good boy or I was a good girl, and then it's over, and now you're in another moment where where that is no longer protecting you.
Right, and I think that's a vital point, and I think in mythology, the myth of Sisyphus that Camus talks about in his quote suicide unquote article, I realize I relate to it because I, like Sisyphus, have to move a boulder up the hill, so to speak, daily, or maybe even more, to protect myself from vulnerability. And still, I may be vulnerable, but this has a way of at least temporarily defending me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think Camus, he creates kind of a heroic image with Sisyphus, and maybe to give our listeners a refresh in the memory of our listeners about the myth of Sisyphus. Is a myth from ancient Greek mythology. And did you want to? Sisyphus is condemned by Zeus.
Right.
What does he do wrong? I don't remember.
No, quite. But he
punished.
does something severe, so severe that the gods punish him by making him daily carry his toil up the hill.
And just at the moment when he is about to reach the top, the boulder
goes down
goes
again.
tumbling down.
Yes.
And he has to do it again.
Yes, and you were referring to that earlier, intimating that we have to show constant vigilance in our lives of protecting ourselves as best we can by what we can, that in my mind has ethics so that we can survive and that we want to survive. And when you talked about beauty and brokenness, one of the things I want to survive for is to continue having my visions, and also to really penetrate and appreciate the beauty of nature.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and as your poem also shows, that you were talking about the transformations, that somehow this absolute vulnerability that is the human condition is connected to visions, to transformation, to metamorphosis, and you can't have one without the other. I think that a lot of times we spend fooling ourselves into pretending that we're not as vulnerable as we actually are. Emily Dickinson has a lot of great comments on this, or ways to capture this idea. One of them is, she writes, "Calm is but a wall of unattempted gauze. An instant's push demolishes, a questioning dissolves." Calm is but a wall. So I see that as that our most this, sort of peaceful sense of repose is just a wall of unattempted gauze. It's just no more. It feels as if it's this solid thing, but it's no more. It's no more substantial. It's just a gauze. An instant's push demolishes, a questioning dissolves. In other words, you can just bore right through that with a question.
Right, and that reminds me of Robinson Jeffers, a couple of lines he has, and the first one, he's speaking of the people's inhumanity to other people, such as war and cruelty. He talks a lot in his poetry about the cruelty to animals, specifically more the cruelty to hawks, which are so beautiful, and yet how people can break their spirit. And the first line is, "Beauty will remain when there is no heart left to beat for it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in another longer poem, Thurso's Landing, Rick Armstrong, a character in it, is talking to his lover Helen, and she's being bitter and upset, and he says, "I'll not live my life as a knot between two nothings. Wear a pair of round zeros for pearls." So he is positive in that, and that we can go on, that he's talking about the human being's heroic side of being able to continue even with nothing. And Paul and I were talking about the LA fires of recent, and how some people didn't realize that they could lose everything. I had relatives that were in danger of losing everything. Unfortunately, they didn't. But some were heroic and said they will rebuild, that this isn't everything, that they still have a spiritual life.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think that and I think that that the Robinson Jeffers there gets at something, which is that because you can anticipate that your whatever height is your next height of joy and fulfillment is going to then still leave you empty the next day. And we've talked about this in the nightmare of time, right? That you can anticipate then that all that you have achieved will ultimately come to nothing, and that's the Jeffers idea that you're talking about, a knot between two nothings, right? But he has that kind of capricious image where he talks about taking that nothingness and making those zeros into pearls,
right.
Converting that into the precious thing that makes the life so sweet and beautifully makes it the ornament of life, the adornment. And there's also, like you said, a kind of exaltation in that image, and also, but you can also see that gesture. It's almost we really are. It is really a bifurcated existence. That where we can't have one without the other. We can't have the exaltation without the that void. But I think that the temptation is to kind of because you can somehow glimpse the annihilation or cancellation of your present joy by seeing that in the future it will be not, then you somehow enter into this space whereby you can't actually access the joy anymore because you have succumbed to a despair that it doesn't have any meaning, and it never will have any meaning,
right.
Because it's that you won't be able to catch up with time. It will always beat you,
right?
And then that leads you to this desperate race against time, which
right.
you will always lose. So it's a futile. So like what? How do we escape from that? That dynamic. We talked about Jeffers as poets offer us, literature offers us visions of exaltation in the midst of that condition. But there's a lot of responses that literature has
right.
to this.
I was just going to mention one reference to music. We talked about literature mostly, but sometimes we bring in the humanities.
Mm-hmm.
And Beethoven, who went deaf and was certainly in despair, still had the courage and the genius to build and write beautiful music. And I had noticed, because you had mentioned this before, in playing the first movement of the Emperor's Concerto, that he had taken the scale like Mozart did and built on that so that he was able to continue, be part of a continuum to create beautiful music, even though he had been in terrible despair.
Yeah. And certainly the Emperor's is a piano concerto, and that begins with this glorious piano riff,
right.
so to speak, in a call and response with the orchestra.
Yes.
Where it's just this swelling, but kind of a cascade of notes that
right.
rises
exactly.
out of this. rises out of nowhere into a peak of exaltation. So I mean I think that you certainly don't feel any void in that music. It feels absolutely full, and in that kind of that I think that we might describe that as kind of the heroic. You were talking about Sisyphus there. A heroic attitude towards this condition, which is that the attitude of conscious awareness of it, but entering into this kind of pure exaltation despite that. I'm trying to think of another example of that kind of heroic attitude towards
I thought of one of your favorites of Emily Dickinson, that although she had Meniere's disease, which is a painful disease, she was able, and there was no real cure for it at that time in the 19th century. But she was able to write this incredible poem, I Could Not Stop for Death. And although it's very ironic and satirical, sardonic in tone, there's a great courage and heroism to it, and to looking at life after death and the repercussions thereof.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is the ultimate kind of, because we don't have control, unless we commit suicide, really, over the circumstances of our death. It makes me think of that Borges story, The Secret Miracle, where there's a Jewish man during the Nazi occupation of Poland is condemned to death by the authorities, and he tries on the day before he's going to be executed to somehow ward off the execution by imagining all the possible ways that he could die, because he knows that the way that he actually dies is not going to be the way that he could have imagined it. And so he tries to he gets this idea of somehow trying to outwit death by coming up with all possible contingencies and somehow cancel it out through his imagination, because it could never happen precisely as he imagines it. So he tries to create this sort of infinite anticipation of death, or ward it off through this anticipation. And that's the initial moment his initial response to that story. But again, it's a situation where you have an intolerable vulnerability, and so how do you escape from that problematic? It's as if you're checkmated, and so how do you respond to the checkmate? Well, then you can do if it's a computer, you do a denial of service attack, which is like when they attack a server by hitting it with all these different all of these different requests, so that it eventually crashes. So maybe we can crash death through a denial of service attack, or through an infinite kind of anticipatory imagination. But with Dickinson, she's imagining that moment of death, and we had a podcast on this, that death is a suitor who comes and picks her up, and she has these kind of vision of her life in kind of a symbolic form, and she passes this. She and death leave in a carriage, and they pass the setting sun, or she says, or rather, he passed us. And then she pauses before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. A house that seemed a swelling in the ground. I mean, I think this is the roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. This is like the consciousness really triumphing over death and achieving a kind of like a genteel, but a surreal genteel kind of graceful kind of encounter with the immensity of the conditions of existence into which we disappear. The roof is scarcely visible, the cornice is centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. Yeah. Did you have any comments?
Yes, I was thinking of, you mentioned Borges before you were speaking of Dickens.
Yeah.
And he had a plague in his life that he had retinitis, and he was gradually going blind, and he went blind. And for a writer, that's quite serious. And in his great short story, The South, he also gets in a dreamlike state, and he's suffering from a disease, and he's in the hospital. And he's very vulnerable, and he says to himself, I dream my life.
Yeah.
And that's his way of counteracting his retinitis and his despair thereof, was writing. And often his writing, even when he was blind, is very graphic and extremely visible, at least to me. I thought it was magnificent. And so he's able to reach hero's status, even though he's struck down by fate, so to speak.
Right. Well, so I mean, I think that's the writer's move, right? Which is, to create art, but then that raises the question: is art really a bulwark, or is it just a dream? Because a dream, on the one hand, you imagine, beautiful, transfiguring visions, but on the other hand, you could imagine it as just as an escape. Is it just a temporary escape, a temporary solution to a problem that can't be solved? And I think that people have this. I mean, to me, that phrase "I dream my life" is glorious. But then I think, what if I dream my life, and then I come to feel that that I've been escaping from life,
right.
And somehow.
Right. I think there's a difference between escapism and writing and seeing visions, as one of your favorite writers did, William Blake.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's talk about Blake.
I think that we go back to Camus and realize it may be temporary, this fix we have with these visions and creativity.
Yeah.
But we have to constantly be vigilant, as I said before, in order to maintain some remnants of spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just think that, like, even in our most common language, breaking news, it's as if news is continually breaking through. Dickinson has that line that I mentioned just a little bit ago, calm is but a wall of unattempted gauze. And it's like, you know, you have a respite, and especially now with our 24-hour news cycle, our news is continually breaking through. And how, you know, most of the time it's bad news. And, and I mean, I think that Dickinson, you know, there's a speech of Claudius in Measure for Measure, or is it Claudio in Measure for Measure, in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, where he has this, he's condemned to death, and the character Claudio is condemned to death, and he has a kind of almost a fearful apotheosis about what death is. I think that's a great speech. I don't have it here. We might read from it, but there's another one that like a panic attack about death. It's like the Scream, like the Renaissance version of the Scream. But Dickinson also, as always, has, and we haven't talked about this one in our podcast, has a great poem. She's got that wall is but calm is but a wall of unattempted God, which is just so, if you think about it, it's such a devastating line.
Yes.
But she also has this, I sometimes drop it for a quick. I sometimes drop it for a quick, this poem. And I think in this poem, I sometimes drop it for a quick, she has this, she really conveys how we are distracted from the conditions of life, and that actually, if we were to imagine what life is, it's in a certain way, it's like lucky that we're not, that we can't imagine it. Somebody was asking, you know, why is it that the universe, you know, is hospitable to life, or seems to be that why you know, where there was a scientific discussion about you know, whether the universe has a designer God. And so the question is always, so why is the universe, you know, isn't it strange that we live in a universe that is hospitable to life, and doesn't that suggest that there's a God? So in Dickinson's time, that would have been the blind watchmaker's argument, you know, that since the universe is like a clockwork, that somehow there's a clockmaker. It suggests a designer, but actually there was a physicist that quipped, you know, actually the universe is really more designed for rocks than it is for life. Actually, it's a very hospitable place if you're a rock, you know, or a nuclear reaction, maybe secondarily, you know, but not if you're life, you know, which seems to exist as like kind of germs essentially on a few little patches, you know, relative to the size of it. I thought that was quite a funny response.
Yeah.
But I want to get back to this poem, the Dickinson poem. She says, I sometimes drop it for a quick, the thought to be alive. Anonymous delight to know, and matter to conceive. Consoles a woe so monstrous that did it tear all day without an instant's respite, 'twould look too far to die. Consoles a woe, the thought to be alive, anonymous delight and matter. She's always grasping at the absolute, the way that we sane wash, to use a common expression now, life, that you're deluding yourself half the time or most of the time, so that you can get through this moment to the next one. The thought to be alive, I sometimes drop it for a quick, anonymous delight and matter to conceive, consoles a woe so monstrous that did it tear all day without an instant's respite, 'twould look too far to die. In other words, if we were truly to understand what life is, it would be a woe so monstrous that did it tear all day without an instant's respite, 'twould look too far to die. It would be, I'm not going to try to paraphrase that, but she's saying something to the effect of that, it would be easier to die than to actually look at what life really is. Delirium diverts the wretch for whom the scaffold neighs. Delirium, distraction, diverts the wretch for whom the scaffold neighs. What an incredible line, as if you're looking at the hangman's noose hanging there, and the scaffold, it's the thing swinging and neighing at you like a horse. The hammock's motion lulls the head so close on paradise. A reef crawled easy from the sea eats off the brittle line. The sailor doesn't know the stroke until he's past the pain. In other words, you don't even know what the hell this is until you get knocked out and plunge into the sea. And it's as if there's the delirium diverts the wretch for whom the scaffold neighs.
It reminds me of success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend the nectar requires soulless need. And she's talking in that poem about war, and the epitome of war is death of a young soldier. And it's very sad, but again, you're looking at life very directly in that point. But I wanted to make another conjecture, and that is that although Dickinson is kind of brutal in her look at life, she really extols and loves nature and is able to, as a botanist, as a young student being a botanist, she's able to describe nature beautifully. And although there's some nature descriptions that again are brutal because nature has that source also, she writes this beautiful lyricism. It's magnificent. So she has this great other side to her that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, let me just give an example of that.
Good. So that each writer that we're, and musician we're talking about, has this source of spirituality and is able to reflect it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't find it. Oh, this one, yes. Two butterflies went out at noon. Two butterflies went out at noon and waltzed above a farm, then stepped straight through the firmament and rested on a beam. And then together bore away upon a shining sea, though never yet in any port their coming mention be. If spoken by the distant bird, if met in ether sea, by frigate or by merchantman, no notice was to me. This is just stunning. Two butterflies went out at noon and waltzed above a farm, then stepped straight through the firmament and rested on a beam of sunlight, I would assume. But that is Dickinson in her exalted lyrical state. But to get back to the question that, let me just say that I think that what that raises, this raises the idea of poetic access to a vertical axis, I would call it vertical axis, poetic access to eternity. That we live, this is also a dichotomy that goes back to the ancient Greeks in the Western tradition anyway, that we live in contingency, in time, and yet we somehow also have access to eternity through our imagination, right? Blake, eternity is in love with the productions of time, and there was another poem that I was thinking about that wonderful poem by Dickinson, where she says, some keep the Sabbath going to church, I keep it at home. Let me give you guys some of this a little bit. Hang on a second. I think...
While you're looking that up, I just want to mention...
excuse me. I dwell in possibility. I think that, let me just read this real quick.
Okay.
I don't want to cut you off, but let me because I want to finish this thought.
Yeah.
So, this is again one of the poetic responses, because it's, on the one hand, you feel as if you're checkmated, right? And as if, you're living in some kind of a science fiction movie where the absolute reality of the situation you're in, as Dickinson describes so well, delirium diverts the wretch for whom the scaffold neighs. The idea that you're somehow distraught, or like to go back to the Borges, where I dreamed my life, where you could interpret that as a dream, as an escape, but then you could also see the imagination as accessing a reality that really does exist, an eternity that does exist, that is there, even if we only experience it fleetingly, because we're stuck back. So another great poem, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky, of visitors the fairest for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. I dwell in possibility, fairer house. That's also almost an artistic manifesto, to say that this is the capacity of the imagination to really find possibility, and that if you can't, then actually that's you're selling the imagination short.
Yes. And another thing you just reminded me of was, we were speaking before of a sense of purpose, and that also gives me strength because I have not only one purpose, but more than one. And all these writers and musicians that we're speaking of do have purpose.
Yeah, absolutely, a sense of purpose, and I think that is a sense of well, I mean, I think that what I see in that is like what that makes me think of is that line about faith, that faith is its own evidence, that that experience of a sense of, let's say, purpose, or a sense of fulfillment is that it doesn't require anything external to itself. It just is.
Right.
And I think that is a great I think that's another great kind of state of mind or great attitude, let's call it, represented by Dick. But she has both. I mean, she has you would call it, on the one hand, that almost anticipating the scream, which is the sense that there's something, a to the human condition that is so somehow vulnerable that we can't actually consider it. That's that one, where it's almost like a panic attack,
Right.
that there's nothing that can protect you, and that actually the delirium is just kind of like a stun gun or something that just prevents you from really comprehending, that you're just kind of a dupe, from really comprehending what's going on, until you just are, or in her last image, just kind of tumble into the sea.
Right.
But then you have the mode of exaltation, which is also of anticipation, dwelling upon the possibility,
right.
where in a situation where there is an endless possibility.
Right.
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah. It's an endless possibility. I mean, I think that I mean, there's also, like, and I think, this discussion, you could also think about Buddhism, the Buddhist attitude, which is that all things are, I mean, that suffering is really, Buddhists really locate suffering with this experience of the temporariness,
Yeah. We spoke of that when we were speaking of the fires, on a
that's
literal
right.
level, but everything
fires,
we have is just temporary. We need to learn acceptance of that.
Well, right. I mean, and I think that there is an attitude towards this subject, which is that intolerable vulnerability, which takes that and tries to build a wall. I mean, you think about the great insane attempts by human beings to try to wall themselves up. I mean, I think of that great Edgar Allan Poe story, The Mask of the Red Death,
Right.
or the Prospero, ironically named,
Yes.
tries to escape from the plague by walling himself up in his castle.
Right.
And there's that wonderful, dark line at the ending, which I'll get here, but in a second. But do you have a comment about that?
Well, you were speaking before, I guess both of us were, about trying to escape our fate or death or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I remember a quotation from, I can't remember who wrote it, but they were supposed to go to this town, and there they would meet their fate. And so they decided to go to another place because they were escaping that town, and they were killed at the other town. So it's saying, the quote was intimating that you can't escape your fate.
Right. So you're right. So if it's
I'm speaking of Poe also.
Right. There's another Poe story about I forget, but I know that idea where you're you think you've outsmarted it in one way, but then you haven't in another. The Mask of the Red Death made me think of is the speech in Richard II, in Shakespeare's Richard II, where Richard realizes that his enemies have committed an insurrection against him, and that he doesn't have the resources to fight them. And he says, in this famous speech, for within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court, and there the antic sits, allowing a little scene, allowing him, the king, a little scene to monarchize. And he's imagining the crown within the hollow crown that rounds the temples of a king, that there is this personification of death. There is death kind of seated in the very center of political authority, grinning at his pomp, allowing him a little breath, a little scene to monarchize, as if this flesh which walls about our life were brass impregnable. As if this flesh which walls about. I think that image is this is the image of the tyrant, who builds a castle, or who tries to respond to the vulnerability of life, to do the opposite by building as if this flesh which walls about our life were brass impregnable, as if to build this impregnable fortress. Humored thus, death comes at last, the little pin bores through his castle wall, and farewell, king. In Poe's words, he says at the end of The Mask of the Red Death, now I'm with Poe instead of Shakespeare, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. Is it wonderfully Baroque?
Yeah.
But And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. The Prince Prospero, who tries to wall himself off, cannot. And so, I mean, I think about the pharaohs, the pharaohs that try to embalm themselves and create these golden sarcophaguses, just in this quest for immortality, and in their intoxication with their own power and their own probably godlike status. They're trying to, the pyramids. They're trying to create this as if this flesh that walls about our life were brass impregnable. This impregnable fortress. If you want to be king of the universe or king of the world, and yet what is that in comparison to the scope of the universe?
Right.
What is that in comparison to anything? And what is that in comparison to Dickinson's I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than more numerous of windows superior for doors. What is that in comparison with the imagination that actually has access to that vertical axis.
That's really interesting. I'm going to come back with something positive again, getting to the end of our discussion. The Seventh Seal by Bergman reminded me of the plague that Poe was talking about, and also Bergman's centering his play around the plague.
Yeah.
And because they're heroic at the end, all of the main characters have the plague, and they stand up accepting their fate rather than just cringing from it or whatever. They're very heroic and stand up, and the play ends.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, the camera is sort of from the perspective of death,
right?
And they all.
The main character's playing chess with death, but he knows inevitably he tries to stall death, but he knows that in the end death will win.
But the move that he made, Max von Sydow's character makes in that movie, is also the move that I think all of us who are committed to life instead of a world of death,
right?
Like
that's
the pharaohs, is he may die, but he protects that family.
Yes, the young family.
The young family.
Yes.
He distracts the death,
right?
So that. He stands in the way so that he is going to die, but he's protected that family.
Yeah, the family escapes, or
right.
Death is diverted.
Right. I mean, that's the move that if you think about it, you said that you're checkmated, but actually you still have that last move to save something.
Yes.
Precious that is worth saving.
Yeah.
And to transfer your consciousness in a way, or your intellectual and imaginative commitment onto a life that continues into the future.
Right. So we see that although we're vulnerable and open, quite open to the flings and arrows of outrageous fortune that Shakespeare talks about, we also are able to show heroism and great spirit in facing our fate, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, and I think that there is one other point that I want to make that about the before we close here. That I think there's you could continue this on these discussion, but I think that in the American tradition, we've talked a lot about Dickinson. I think that Walt Whitman has a unique kind of attitude towards this situation, which is that he has a kind of this attitude with he recognizes that either that in order for life to be blessed, in order for there to be some kind of grace, that you have to accept all of life. And that's what Leaves of Grass really is. It's his acceptance of and his vision really of the grace in all of life. And that's why people wonder, why is he have these catalogs of things that he's praising, where he talks about the quahog and its callous shell, and the carpenter, and the child who's just drawn a curlicue with a charcoal stick and disappears in the night, and he goes on to list so many different varied faces of life and varied situations, and that somehow the idea is that in that acceptance of life means accepting absolutely everything, absolutely, that even if you were to see it correctly, even the most horrific possible depth of existence is somehow also, from the proper angle of vision, can be seen as being blessed. And that's why there is this kind of Christ-like project that he has in poetry, which is to see that all of it has to be blessed. And I think that he's the opposite of the pharaohs, or the ones that seek control, because what they're trying to do in a certain way is a total negation of, because they're just trying to preserve their life, almost in the way a cancer continues on immortally, but it destroys that which it's living on. Whereas Whitman tries to access a consciousness that is that imagines, and in a way he reaches a place similar to Dickinson in the Because I Could Not Stop for Death, where he says, I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. Just that absolute, you will hardly know, I'm paraphrasing now and recognizing me, but I will filter and fiber your blood. Missing me somewhere, look for me elsewhere. I am somewhere waiting for you. I stop somewhere waiting for you. Because I could not stop. I stop somewhere waiting for you. That somehow utterly encompassing vision that he had. And so, I think that the way to end here is, there's a lot of attitudes, is that celebration in the midst of contingency of the absolute plasticity and metamorphic power and mysterious power of consciousness. And Emerson said that there is a residuum, that is always remains untapped
Right.
within consciousness, and the spirit.
Right. And Jeffers said the same thing, really, when he said, we're a pair of round zeros for pearls.
Right, and so now we've come full circle,
Right.
and so I think that the it's very easy to come up with a logic that is inescapable, right? To trap yourself through a to declare these are the conditions and even if they're remember, laws are in nature are just observations of repeated circumstances. They're not actually laws. They're just maybe however persistent they are. That was the other thing that I think is great about Whitman, is that he talks about all the people that undersell consciousness and undersell the human spirit. We've had ducking and stooping about enough. I am not here to that he says that the whining and the about life, that it's all a suck and a sell. That he is going to have a more legitimately exalted vision of life.
Right.
And so I think that really is the inheritance that poetry gives us. It gives us an access to this more authentically exalted version of life that helps us to not just escape from the contingency and vulnerability of life, but to transform its conditions or to get access and entrance to
and actually celebrate.
Yeah. Which you can never know unless you are open to it.
Right.
Okay, well, so I think that was
Did we record the last part?
it's still going. Yeah.
Oh.
That was a superb conversation about fundamental, theme in literature, and thank you guys for joining us in this conversation, and we look forward to chatting with you again. Did you have any other last comments?
No, if people have any questions or want to add, please do so. And thank you very much for partaking and listening.
Okay, love you all. Bye-bye.